You're watching F1 2023 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco. The debut of the much-anticipated Mercedes upgrade package at Monaco was inconclusive, but it gives us a clear indication of the direction Mercedes has staked its long-term hopes of transforming from also-ran into title challenger on. Monaco was always going to be of limited use to evaluate the package given the unique nature of the circuit. As driver George Russell said, "Whatever we take away from this weekend, we'll take with a pinch of salt and go into Barcelona with a clean slate." But Monaco allowed Mercedes to get started with a package that was visually dramatically different and represented the first deviation from the zero-sidepod concept used since the start of this ground effect regulations era. The results at Monaco didn't look dramatically different to usual, with Lewis Hamilton 6th fastest in qualifying with a deficit that was only fractionally closer to the front than the average Mercedes disadvantage in the first 5 races. Hamilton finished 4th, ahead of Russell. But there was still something to learn both for Mercedes and the race, so let's take a closer look at the changes and the rationale behind what team principal Toto Wolff called a fundamental shift in the design direction. This upgrade is not a B-spec car, because for that nomenclature to apply, it would need to include a new chassis. Before the cost cap era, Mercedes would have designed a new chassis as well, but that was not possible because of the financial constraints. But the revisions were significant nonetheless, with the key changes to the front suspension, underfloor and sidepods. We'll look at these in detail in a moment, but first let's look at the big picture. This is not just an upgrade, but a fundamental shift in concept that sets the course for Mercedes for the seasons to come. It is a compromised version of the long-term vision. That's because there are limitations in fitting the upgrade to the existing architecture of the car. This is not only because of the cost cap, but also rules such as the need to homologate the gearbox for the season that prevents major changes in rear suspension geometry. As Mercedes trackside engineering director Andrew Shovlin explained, if you start with a clean sheet, it's a lot easier to optimise than if you're halfway through development and suddenly you make a pretty big change. What really matters is what Shovlin went on to say, which is that the positive of that is we've got a big long list of things we'd like to do with the car in terms of future development. This is just the first step on a revised development journey for Mercedes. The scope of the upgrade reflects the fact that it's not just about adding downforce, it's also about modifying the mechanical platform to allow the car to run lower without hitting the ground or suffering porpoising problems or compromising the ride too much by running super stiff. Russell and Lewis Hamilton were cautiously optimistic in their feedback on the car. Russell said it produced no scares, while Hamilton immediately felt the change, particularly at the front of the car. Both also felt there were signs of improvement in terms of braking stability, which has previously been a weakness for the Mercedes. It was a promising start, so let's delve into exactly what changed. For ground effect cars, the underfloor is the key downforce producing component. Usually we would only see a small part of the story, but Hamilton did the watching world, including rival teams, a favour by crashing at Mirabeau during FP3. He would potentially have been able to drive back to the pits, but for the front wing getting caught in the barrier. That necessitated a full recovery job. The car was craned high above the track, allowing the world to see the crucial underfloor that is normally hidden in glorious detail. The airflow in the underfloor is a complex one of multiple interacting airflows. It's also a very three-dimensional process, with the expansion rates managed not only by the vertical shapes, but also what might be called the topography of the floor. Towards the front of the floor, you can see how the airflow is turned using the 4 permitted vanes, with these mostly turning the airflow outwards. The small vanes on the outer edge of the floor act almost as an extension of these splitters. The outer corners will set up some vortices which work in conjunction with aero detailing on the outer edge of the floor. If this works as intended, this will reduce the airflow that the low pressure under the car will be trying to pull in. The main channels show the airflow the diffuser has to work with. This is taken from between the innermost forward splitter and the inner floor and side of the chassis. This means the diffuser has the maximum length to accelerate the flow and generate as low a pressure under the car as possible. The throat of the floor is very close to the middle of the car's wheelbase. Ensuring this works consistently from high to low ride heights is critical to the stability of the car's aerodynamic centre of pressure. As Russell said, the magic is underneath the floor. This makes this the centrepiece of the upgrade. The modified sidepods have been in the works since pre-season. Gone is the almost non-existent narrow version, and in its place, a more conventional design. As part of this, the upper side impact system spur is now integrated into the sidepod rather than within its own independent shroud. As promised by the team, it's not simply a copy of a rival, even though it is closer to what has become conventional in F1. So it's not a Red Bull or Ferrari clone. The new shape allows Mercedes to accelerate the airflow as it is turned around the sidepods, although for whatever reason there's little sign of a conventional Coke bottle shape behind. But there is more of a downwash ramp towards the rear. The radiator inlet has also changed dramatically from the tall, narrow design to a much squarer one. However, it's a long way short of the letterbox shape used by Red Bull or the more rounded version run by Ferrari. That's potentially one of the compromises having to be made this year. Although Mercedes is understood to have modified the radiators, the shape of the monocoque, dictated by having the cockpit further forward, potentially constrains the space for, and therefore the shape of, the coolers. Mercedes confirmed earlier this year that changes under the bodywork had to be made to fit the new sidepods and the accompanying tweaked engine cover. It's likely the radiator package was part of that. Next year, with a complete redesign, Mercedes will presumably take another step closer to the kind of shape we see from Red Bull. Progress is a race that has no end. After every finish line, another challenge awaits. How can Aramco continue to push innovation in a sport at the forefront of technology? This is how. Discover how Aramco and the Aston Martin Formula One team aim to meet Formula One's sustainable fuel targets. Aramco, powered by How. Mercedes regards improvements to the mechanical platform as a key part of its development path. As Wolff said recently, for our car it's more about the ride control than it is about sheer downforce. This means significant changes have been made to the front suspension. These even received the approval of Gary Anderson, technical expert for the race, who sets high standards for suspension design and has been consistently disappointed by Mercedes over the past year. As he put it, the front suspension is the one part of this package that I think it is engineered exceptionally well. As Anderson explains, it's all well and good having an underfloor producing lots of downforce, but you need to have good control over the centre of aerodynamic pressure shift. That can be achieved either by running very stiff, potentially too stiff, or reacting to the changing longitudinal loads through the suspension linkage. Mercedes has attempted to achieve the latter by increasing the amount of anti-dive it's running in the front suspension. An estimate based on photos suggests that Red Bull's carrying around 45 degrees of anti-dive, with the previous specification of Mercedes running perhaps 15 degrees. That difference now appears to have roughly halved, with Mercedes somewhere in the region of 30 degrees. Mercedes has achieved this primarily by raising the height of the inboard pickup point for the front upper wishbone leg and slightly lowering the rear leg's pickup point. The angle between the front and rear leg defines the level of anti-dive. Anti-dive in itself isn't a magic bullet and is a well-known geometry, but it helps you to control the aerodynamic platform, provided you can get the ride characteristics you want with it and can live with the reduced braking feel. While it is following Red Bull's lead and the track rod and lower wishbone forward leg are similar, it's not a copy of its geometry. The Mercedes still has a pushrod front suspension, with Red Bull using pull rod. The forward leg on both the upper and lower wishbones largely dictates the lateral suspension geometry. Anderson suggests this redesign could increase the height of the front roll centre and therefore lead to more understeer. There will also be reduced negative camber change with suspension movements. While the front suspension movement on F1 cars is minimal, Mercedes will have to run nearer to Pirelli's maximum permitted negative camber. Under braking and in slow corners, this will reduce the front tyre contact patch. In the faster corners, it can also mean that it is difficult to get enough camber to withstand the lateral cornering forces, meaning that the tyre tends to tuck under. Both of these characteristics effectively reduce front grip. The early feedback has been positive, suggesting that the front suspension change designed to improve the mechanical platform has been achieved without compromising the ride. In fact, Hamilton was encouraged by the front end characteristics. And if it achieves that and allows the car to run lower and with reduced aerodynamic centre of pressure shift, Mercedes will have made a step. It's impossible to say whether the Mercedes upgrade performed exactly as expected and whether the team is now on a trajectory that can get it back to the front, even if that's not this year. But it clearly worked well. Wolff said that it will not be until the Spanish Grand Prix and beyond that it collects enough data on the car to have a full understanding. He expects the performance will improve as Mercedes builds that knowledge, but it won't transform its pace. Wolff described the understanding of the car as immature and confirmed there will be plenty more upgrades to come across the rest of the year, while Hamilton described the performance of the car as proof of concept. But it's going to be a long haul to get the best out of this shift of direction, with the rest of the season now primarily all about learning to ensure the 2024 car is close enough to Red Bull and the rest at the front to make a fight of it.
Thanks for watching F1 2023 Technical Analysis, brought to you by Aramco.